Honey by Sarah Weeks. Chapter 14. Did you know my mother? Asked Melody. Phoebe nodded. We were best friends back in elementary school. Do you know my dad too? Melody asked. His name's Henry Bishop. I met Henry for the first time at your mother's funeral, said Phoebe. That's where I met you too. Was I there? Asked Melody, surprised. Sleeping in your father's arms, said Phoebe. Surely he must have told you about it. He doesn't like to talk about my mother very much, said Melody. Nobody does. I think they're afraid it might make me sad. A dog barked and Phoebe jumped as if she'd been poked with a stick. Is that your dog? Asked Melody. Yes, said Phoebe. He probably spotted a cat. The dog barked again and Phoebe jumped even higher. Are you okay? Melody asked. I'm fine, said Phoebe, smoothing a wrinkle from the front of her dress. Just a little tired. I should probably get going, Melody told Phoebe. Nick's waiting for me. Before you go, I want to show you something. Phoebe walked over to the shampoo sink and took the framed photo off the hook. Melody had been so busy contending with Miss Hogan she hadn't even noticed it hanging there. It was a faded Time magazine cover. On it was a picture of a girl with long yellow braids sitting on a piano stool in a pair of overalls, blowing a big pink bubble with her gum. The headline read, Who's Your Wonder Kid? The cover story had been about a girl named Annabelle Winters, who'd started playing the piano at the age of 3. Before she lost her baby teeth, she was giving concerts with some of the most renowned symphony orchestras in the world. Audiences went wild over the little girl from the Midwest who could play Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff as easily as chopsticks. What the magazine article didn't mention was that after her name in the spotlight, Annabelle stopped giving concerts and went home to rural Indiana. She became a piano teacher and eventually got married and started a family. Annabelle Winters had been America's darling and the pride and joy of Royal. She had also been Melody's mother. This is Annabelle, I remember, said Phoebe. After this picture was taken, your mother's career began to take off. Then my family moved west to Cloverhedge, and Annabelle and I lost touch. That's too bad, said Melody. She was having a hard time imagining her mother as a little girl in elementary school with long yellow braids for a best friend. You look just like her, you know, said Phoebe. It was the second time in a week someone had told her that. Melody studied the photograph carefully, but she couldn't see any resemblance between her and this beautiful girl with long yellow braids. You can keep that if you want, said Phoebe. Thanks, Melody told her, but my father might not like that. He probably wouldn't want any reminders of my mother lying around, not that he and Miss Hogan are getting married. What? Said Phoebe. That's the whole reason Nick and I came here today. Teeny Nelson heard someone talking about Henry being bitten by the love bug. She was here this morning with her mother. I don't remember anything like that, said Phoebe. Then again, things were a little crazy around here this morning. It doesn't matter anymore, said Melody. I knew my dad was seeing somebody. I just didn't know who she was. Now I do. I gather you're not too fond of Miss Hogan, said Phoebe. Melody shook her head sadly. Can I ask you something? She said. What was my mother like? Phoebe smiled and put her hand on Melody's shoulder. Why don't we go sit down? She said. Phoebe led Melody over to a wicker bench under one of the windows, and they sat down next to each other. I only knew Annabelle when she was younger, Phoebe began, but I doubt she changed very much. Everybody always wanted to be around her. She was smart and pretty and funny. She was funny? Asked Melody. The few times her mother had talked about her mother, it was so sad and somber. It never occurred to Melody that her mother could have been funny. She'd always pictured her as a serious person who could play the piano in front of a huge audience without even getting nervous. Not some funny little girl who chewed bazooka and knew how to crack a joke. Phoebe nodded. I remember she used to do these impressions of her mother that were so accurate it was almost scary. Melody wasn't close to her maternal grandparents. Obie and Opa had moved back to Switzerland not long after Melody was born. They sent her a card on her birthday each year, but other than that she had very little contact with them. They had disappeared too. Now Melody felt something she hadn't let herself feel before. Left behind. What else do you remember about my mother? She asked Phoebe. The same thing everyone else remembers. She was unbelievably talented. When she sat down at the piano, she got this far-away look on her face. And when she started playing, well, have you ever heard her play? There were lots of recordings made. Melody shook her head. There were boxes of tapes and CDs on the shelves in the music room, but the door to the but the door to that room was always kept closed. It wasn't that Melody wasn't allowed to go in. She just never had any real desire to. Melody cleared her throat. There was a question she had been wanting to ask for a very long time. A question her father had made clear he didn't want to answer. How did my mother die? Bibi hesitated. Obviously, Melody's father was not comfortable talking to Melody about her mother, and it sounded as he must have communicated this somehow to the people around her, too. Bibi didn't want to go against his wishes, but on the other hand, it was clear Melody was looking for answers to some very important questions. I don't know the details, Bibi said, other than that it was sudden and unexpected. Your mother had wanted a home birth, but there were complications. That's really all I know. Melody was quiet. Deep down inside her something was stirring a feeling she couldn't quite find the right words to describe. Will you tell me about the funeral? She asked. Bibi reached over and took Melody's hand. Her fingernails were painted a pale shade of pink that reminded Melody of the inside of a conch shell Grandpa had brought back to her from a trip he and Grandma had taken to Florida. There were lots of people there, Bibi began, but nobody spoke a word. There was no minister and no speeches were made. There was only music. What kind of music? Melody asked. If I remember correctly, it was a string quartet. Wonderful musicians your mother had played with when she was younger. Then at the end your dad played a tape he'd made of your mother playing one of her favorite pieces. He recorded it himself at home not long before you were born. You could hear Annabelle laughing and talking about... Bibi started to get choked up and had to stop for a minute. It was a lovely memorial. Lovely, just like Annabelle was. Melody felt tears prickle up in her eyes, and the mysterious feeling got stronger. Miss Hogan isn't lovely, she said, and she isn't funny either. Why would my dad want to marry someone like that? I don't know, said Bibi, shaking her head. Neither do I, Melody told her. I wanted him to find someone special, but I thought she'd be more like... Your mom, said Bibi. No, me. A single tear rolled down Melody's cheek, and she brushed it away. Don't worry, Melody, Bibi said, squeezing her hand. Everything's going to be okay. How Melody wanted that to believe her, but she didn't see how it could possibly be true. Chapter 15. Mo felt uneasy. The large orange cat had been lurking around outside all day. He'd barked at him earlier, and he'd run under a bush, but Mo could tell he was still nearby. The tall woman would be back soon to give him his supper. After that, she would probably set the kitchen table and click until it was time to go to bed. Lately, she'd been too busy to spend much time cooking. He couldn't even remember the last time she'd made him chicken and dumplings or a nice roast. Instead, she'd been giving him kibble with a few table scraps tossed in. He hoped she hadn't grown tired of them, and that she wouldn't disappear into thin air, the way the large woman had. Even though it happened a long time ago, he still remembered her and the silver necklace she'd given him. How he'd loved the way the jingle-jangle made him feel. Mo looked out the window. The cat was nowhere to be seen. He thought about chicken and dumplings. The tall woman always made sure to give him plenty of gravy, and she was careful to remove the bones first before she filled his dish. Chicken bones could splinter, get stuck going down. Mo thought about roast beef. The tall woman always saved the end piece for him, crispy and dripping with juice. He would barely take time to chew. He was so eager to gobble it down. Mo's stomach rumbled. What would he be having for supper that night? He wondered. Whatever it was, he hoped there would be a lot of it. He lifted his nose and caught a whiff of newly cut grass. Then he went and sat by the door to wait for the tall woman to come home. Chapter 16. Since Melody wouldn't accept the photograph, Bibi tried to give her a bottle of nail polish instead. I'm not really a nail polish kind of person, Melody explained. As you can probably tell, don't get me wrong, I think the colors you make are really beautiful. This yellow one reminds me of a daffodil, and this blue one looks like a swimming pool, and the one you've got on your toes is the exact color of a ripe papaya. I wish you could come up with names for all of my polishes, said Bibi, impressed. Why do you put numbers on them anyway? Asked Melody. I'm not clever with words the way you are, Bibi told her. Melody held up a bottle of dark blue polish. Bits of glitter caught in the light and made it sparkle like 1,000 stars. If they were real stars, Melody would have made the same wish on every one of them, but wishing was what had gotten her in trouble in the first place. I should get going, Melody said, putting the bottle of polish back on the shelf. Nick must be wondering where I am. The phone started to ring. I'd better get that, Bibi said. It might be a customer. Please come back and see me again soon. My door is always open if you want to talk." As Melody left, she heard Phoebe pick up the phone. "It's a beautiful day at the Beehive," she sang into the receiver. But it didn't feel like a beautiful day to Melody. It felt more like the end of the world. When Melody got home, Nick was waiting for her on the front steps with a bag of Skittles in his hands. "They were out of wild berries, so I got you original," he said. Melody thanked him for the Skittles and immediately tore open the pack. "How did it go with Teeny?" she asked, tossing a handful of candy in her mouth. Wild berry or not, they still tasted good. Luckily for her, Mom was still asleep when we got there, but Teeny's going to have some explaining to do with the state of that tutu. "Do you still want to stay for dinner?" asked Melody. She offered him some Skittles, but Nick shook his head. "I kind of figured dinner was off. I'm sure you don't exactly feel like celebrating." "Believe me," said Melody, "eating Grandpa's tuna noodle casserole is no party." Nick laughed. He was relieved to hear Melody making a joke. "You know," he said, "your dad and Miss Hogan actually do get married. You don't have to go to Siberia. You can come live with me. We've got a spare room in the basement, and my dad and Jenny are crazy about you." "Tell the truth," said Melody, tossing another handful of candy in her mouth. "If things had gone differently at that Beehive today, and we'd actually had to get our fingernails painted, would you have gone through with it?" "Absolutely," said Nick, "but only if I got to pick my own color." Melody smiled. She was lucky to have a friend like Nick. It would be several hours before it was time for dinner, so Melody asked Nick if he'd like to help her dig up some dandelions. "My dad said he'd pay me a nickel for each one," she explained. "If we make enough, maybe we can buy a new bowl for Bebe." "That's a great idea," said Nick. They found a second weed fork in the garage and got down to business. Nick turned out to be pretty good at pulling dandelions. Meanwhile, Melody came up with a new strategy, picturing Miss Hogan's face on every plant she yanked out. It was very effective. "Bebe was pretty nice, didn't you think?" asked Nick. "Yeah," said Melody. "She sure does like bright colors," said Nick, loosening the dirt around another plant. "Good thing she's not a dog." Melody stopped what she was doing and looked at him. "Okay," she said, "I'll bite. Why is it a good thing that Bebe isn't a dog?" "Because dogs are colorblind. They can only see yellow and blue. Everything else looks gray." "How do you know that?" "Mrs. McKenna told me last year. Remember all those stories she used to tell us about our dog Oreo?" "His name was Malamar," said Melody. "I knew it was a cookie," said Nick. By the time Grandpa called them in for supper, Nick and Melody had amassed an impressive pile of dandelions, all the roots still attached. "If you want one, I can come back tomorrow and help you pull more," Nick offered. "If you want, I mean." Okay. As soon as they sat down at the table, Nick and Grandpa started arguing about who the top draft pick for the Pacers were to be. Melody liked basketball, but she had more important things on her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about her father and Miss Hogan. "What's the matter, Melly?" Grandpa asked after a while. "Don't you like my casserole?" "I'm not very hungry," she said, pushing a slimy noodle across the plate with her fork. "I'll just drink my milk." Nick, who was always hungry, cleaned his plate in 2 seconds flat and asked for more. "What did the two of you do this afternoon?" asked Grandpa, dropping a heaping spoonful of tuna noodle casserole into Nick's plate. Nick glanced at Melody. "Not much," he said, shoving another forkful of noodles into his mouth. Melody had asked him not to discuss the trip to the Beehive with Grandpa. When her father got home on Monday, she planned to tell him what had happened with Miss Hogan. He could give Grandpa the big news about the wedding himself. After dinner, Nick and Melody helped clear the table and load the dishwasher. Then Grandpa looked at the clock and asked if they'd like to watch Jeopardy with him. "It doesn't count as screen time because it's educational," Grandpa insisted. "Way to circumvent, Grandpa," laughed Melody. He often let Melody stretch the rules when he was around. Melody popped up a bag of microwave cuddle corn, and she and Nick joined Grandpa in the den to watch Jeopardy. One of the categories in the first round was American classics. "What is the Grand Canyon?" Grandpa called out in response to Clue. "Wait, no, I take that back. What is American cheese?" It was during Final Jeopardy that Nick started rubbing his stomach. "I don't feel so good," he said. "Me neither," said Grandpa. What followed was not pretty. It turned out that Melody was lucky to have lost her appetite at dinner. The tuna noodle casserole, having sat in the hot trunk of Grandpa's car for hours, wasn't in the best condition, and as a result, both Grandpa and Nick got food poisoning. Nick had to call his father to come pick him up, and Grandpa retreated to the upstairs bathroom where he would revisit that casserole many times before the night was over. It had been had been a long and difficult day. Melody was exhausted, but the sound of Grandpa dragging his oxygen tank back and forth to the bathroom was too much for her to take, so she decided she might be better off finding somewhere else to sleep. Nick had thrown up on the couch in the den right before he left, and the pullout-silver bed in Father's office was covered with books and papers. This left only one option, so grabbing her blanket and pillow, Melody went downstairs to the music room. She had never slept there before. In fact, she couldn't even remember the last time she'd gone in. There's something sad about the way the room felt, like a party after the guests had gone home, and all that's left is a bunch of empty cups and crumpled napkins. Tall sets of shelves crammed with books and boxes lined the walls, and in the corner of the room sat her mother's piano, the lid closed and the glossy black surface dulled by a layer of fine dust. Grandma had taught Melody how to play chopsticks on the piano when she was a little girl, but that was the extent of her repertoire. It had been ages since she'd played on even that. There's a faded blue velvet couch along the back wall. Melody spread out her blanket, switched off the light, and settled herself in. As she lay there in the dark, going over the events of the day in her head, she remembered how, when Teeny was having her meltdown, Bibi had asked if there was anything she could do to help Teeny feel better. "Candy makes my feelings feel better," Teeny had told her. Melody wished the solution could be that easy for her now. She had enjoyed the Skittles Nick had brought her, but Candy couldn't even begin to touch the misery she felt inside. The only thing she could think of would make her feel better was if she woke up the next morning and found out this whole thing had been a bad dream. If only that could really happen, Melody thought as she turned over and closed her eyes. If only, if only, if only.